Well, welcome to another episode of The Family Business, where I am thrilled to introduce you to Lisa Suennen, the venture Valkyrie. Lisa, thanks so much for joining the show.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, after I spoke to you a couple times, this was a no-brainer.
Sweet.
So the best way to start is just to take a minute and give people a bit of a snapshot of who you are. You can talk about what you're doing now. You can talk about what you've just done recently. You can talk about something you've done in the past, but give somebody a bit of a frame of what you've
Okay.
done. And this way they get some context, and then we'll get to the fun stuff about your life.
I think the best way to think about what I've done is more in a global way. What I really love to do is think about the intersection of entrepreneurship, innovation, healthcare from all different sides, and I've worked really hard in my career to find great opportunities, entrepreneurs, ways of changing the healthcare system and advance those in either as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as an operating person, as a consultant, but to, keep moving healthcare forward in a positive way.
Well, no, you clearly have. I mean, when we're done with this, whoever's watching this, go look at her profile, and her CV is like a yellow pages. I mean, it's just amazing all the things that
Oh,
she's
thank
done.
you.
Yeah, it's really something. After 20 years of doing this, it's rare that a CV makes me stop and
Well,
read it, and it's been impressive. So, what we do here is I like to talk about how your career and your family is intertwined. There's no
sure.
balance. There's no expectation of that. That's a bit of a myth. But what I
It's
would
a
like to
big myth.
understand, yeah, it is. I mean, people think they have it. I'm like, no, you
Yeah.
don't. But I would like to get an idea of how that you've made some of these choices.
Okay.
So, for instance, your daughter Maddie
hmm
is an adult now, and
Yep.
I'm curious, when she first came out of the scene, where were you in your career?
So my daughter's now 27. She's adulting, as she puts it. Um, she was born when I was a senior executive at Merit Behavioral Care, what was then called American Biodyne. I was, running sales and marketing and parts of the operating organization at this company. It was kind of a mid-stage startup. I'm trying to remember, let's see, 1996 when she was born. Um, we were we had gone public. We had now then been acquired, and we were closing in on being an $800 million company, revenue wise. And back in the days when you measured by revenue, not by valuation. And, you know, I had a huge span of control. I had a lot of people working for me. I had a national business that I ran. And I remember people saying, like, how are you going to have a kid? And I was like, well, the old fashioned way, when a man loves a woman. But I it was interesting to think about how you balance, like you said, there's no such thing, how you juggle, all the different things, but you make it work.
Well, for those of you that don't know much about that company's history, Melissa came on board and they were at about a 5 million in revenue. And so
Yeah.
to raise it from 5 to 800, bit of a jump. So when she came into your life, how did you adjust as far as either your travel or your scheduling,
Mhm.
or did you bring her to work? I mean, what did you do in that? Because I mean, for you were having such an enormous impact. And then I'm curious how you had to make things work. Because obviously I know you
Yeah.
want to balance both in the best you can.
Well, I mean, a couple of things, I guess. One, I had a great husband. I still have. He's hanging around here somewhere. He may make an appearance.
Good.
Who was a real partner to me. He took that very seriously because I traveled all the time. I took 6 months off. My company gave me 6 months off,
Wow.
which was awesome. It's funny, as I was literally leaving the house in labor, I got a call from the guy that was running Tennessee Medicaid. Then we had just been selected to do a carve out for mental health carve out for Medicaid in Tennessee. And he said, we need to talk. And I said, I kind of got to go. I said, I'm having a baby. He goes, oh, when? I'm like, maybe in an hour. It's
Can
so
we talk
funny.
after?
Yeah, really. But I took 6 months off, which was
Yeah.
great. I had some space. And then after that, I just went back to it. And I had a very actively engaged husband. I had a wonderful nanny.
Hmm.
And I took my daughter early on a lot of my trips. I mean, my daughter and my nanny, we went a lot of places together. And I was fortunate that I could do that. Not everybody can do that. And Man, there were some funny moments. I mean, I remember there was a trip to Hawaii, which sounds fun, but wasn't, because it was a big, we were writing an RFP to get a big contract there. And I'd given my nanny the night off, and we ended up having to do a big rewrite. And I remember she was sleeping in my hotel room. And so I ended up sitting in the bathroom, on the counter and the toilet, kind of typing, listening for the kid. It was so funny. And then we developed a protocol as she got older, which was, she had a little pet, like a Beanie Baby mouse, known as Cheeser, who I would draw in my lousy drawing skills in situations that were wherever I was. I was in St. Louis, it's under the arch. I was in Hawaii, it was in a palm tree, whatever. These, pretty lame drawings, and I would fax them to her because that's how you did it back in those days. And she would color them in for me for when I got home.
Wow,
And
that's
it
clever.
was just a way to stay in touch. We didn't have FaceTime then or any of that, right? I don't know. We just made it work, It was hard, but I was always worried and guilty about being away and being less engaged and not being the mom that made the, peanut butter sandwiches for the field trips and all that. And, or I guess you don't make those now because kids are allergic to peanut butter, but whatever. Right. But I was really fortunate. I got a gift from her when she was graduating from college. And she said, by the way, Mom, all those years, I had that you were gone, I realized you were the mom that was working and making a career and being a role model for what I want to be, so you can let go of that stuff, it was okay.
They don't seem to ever figure it out until later. At 13, they're just slamming doors and furious at whatever. I have a daughter who's 19, and I've lived it. And it's interesting, though, because now as my daughter gets older, she absolutely appreciates my wife. My wife is in a different world than you, but similar as far as ambition and accomplishment and that kind of thing. And it's, you carry that with you wherever you go. I don't blame you. I'm glad to hear that she was able to articulate that, because until you hear it from her, no one else telling you really will register. It's only her that probably can make you appreciate that. So
really true.
I started reading some of your blog. She has this terrific blog, everybody, called The Venture Valkyrie, and it's been 13 years of you posting.
Yeah, at least. I mean, I started, probably about that long, maybe a little longer.
Yeah, it's really impressive because you don't leave healthcare completely, even though sometimes it gets kind of pithy and funny, but they're still within the healthcare space. And I'm a bit of a comic book kid when I was a kid, so I saw you had the cover of one of the Defenders with the Valkyrie on it. I'm like, my goodness, I remember that. And so is that why you chose it? Were you a comic book kid, or that's just Valkyrie is such a...
I do like comics. My dad was super into them, but and so yes, I had familiarity with it, but really it was so funny. The reason I chose it was when I started my blog, I was really the only female venture capitalist writing a blog back then, and I was the only healthcare person, writing a blog back then, pretty much. And so I wanted to use venture in the title. And I like alliteration because I'm kind of an English, dork that way. And I remembered the myth of the Valkyries. The myth of the Valkyries is about the goddesses, they're Norse goddesses that kind of fly over the soldiers into war and decide who's going to heaven. And I thought that was, in my sick sense of humor mode, pretty funny about being a venture capitalist.
Yep, it works. Okay. I was wondering how that came together. All right, now we know.
I literally never thought it would become like a moniker, like people call me that. And I think it's so funny because it was just meant to be a title, right? But nah, whatever. I'll take it.
You never know what's going to stick. It's funny. You go to so much trouble to name your kid, and within 5 years, their friends are calling them Booger. And there's, you're like, great. Yeah, I'm glad I went to all this trouble, went through 100 books and names to get to that point. So one of the other things that I thought was fascinating about you is all the things you do outside of work. I mean, your philanthropic, wow, that was a tough one, work is extraordinary in addition to your community work. So let's talk a bit about how you find time for all of those things, in addition to being on the boards and having a job and all these things that you've done over the years. I mean, it's truly extraordinary, the amount you've done. So I'm curious how do you schedule your time?
Well, I sleep really badly, so that helps.
Okay.
And I just am so type A, I guess. I like to fill every minute with something. But I go up and down with that. I go up and down with feeling like I've got it all figured out and then other times where I feel like it's just out of control and I got to cut back things. And I've gone through that cycle enough time to realize that it works itself out. But for me, you got to work. I got to work. Yeah, I like to work. I am actively engaging in the process of looking for my next full-time gig right now. But in the meantime, even when I'm working full time, like I got to keep doing things that I think are important, contributing in a way that makes me happy. So I don't know. It doesn't seem to be a burden to me. It just feels like what you do. I fit it in.
Yeah, listen, I think that people like you are the ones who give other people encouragement to try stuff because they'll look at you and say, well, God, look what all this she's doing. I could do one thing. She's doing 12. And I think that you just set an example. And I wonder if Maddie is involved in her community and she does things outside of work as well. Did that rub off on her?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, she was just telling me this week she's going to apply to be either a big sister or a
Really?
CASA person or something. She loves kids, so she wants to do something working with kids. And so she almost always has something going. She's done a lot of tutoring and mentoring of younger girls. And yeah, I'm really proud of her that way. She's stays engaged in the world in a meaningful way.
Well, listen, they're always watching you as they're
Yeah,
growing
totally.
up. They may not say anything, but they absolutely see what you're
Well, they
doing.
tell you that your clothes look funny or you're acting weird, but they don't tell
That
you
part's
something
true.
else.
Yeah, I get made fun of a lot at home. So some of the things that are interesting about you that I noticed the organizations that you're a part of, you teach at Berkeley in an
Yep.
MBA class that we'll get into in a second. You're a part of this organization that's related to NASA, which I found fascinating. I'm like, I got to understand what that is.
Cool.
And then the one that made me smile was the C Sweetener organization. So let's touch on all three of those briefly because they're all so different, and yet they're all one thing in common to me where they're just bringing up either the intellectual or the encouragement of study and innovation. And so I'm curious about each of those three and how you got into those.
Sure. Okay. So C Sweetener is a mentoring organization. I started that for two reasons. One, I was at the Aspen Institute as a fellow, a health innovation fellow, and I had to come up with a project. I had to start something. That was the sum total of the description of our obligation as fellows. And I was kind of in the last week of being able to pick my thing after leaving it to the last minute the way I do. And it was a Friday afternoon and I was going through my emails that I'd left to the end of the week, which I do. And I get lots and lots of emails from young men and women, entrepreneurs and others, investors and, people in healthcare wanting advice. Cause I guess because I've been so out there speaking and writing and stuff. So people know who I am and they reach out. It's kind of fascinating. And I get so many though in an average week that I can't possibly speak to them all. And I was lamenting that in my brain. I wish there was like a match.com where people could find each other and help, because I hate to say no. And then I had that epiphany where I was like, I could make that as my project. And that's really kind of what it turned out to be. So I focused on women, young women, rising women in healthcare, matching them with mentors, male and female, who could help them rise in the C-suite or to the C-suite. And yeah, it was fabulously fun. I worked with a guy who had started a company called Instavisor that created technology for this kind of matching, which is, just like a match.com kind of a deal from a technology standpoint. He was using it to match coaches to athletes and people within college programs and alumni and things like that. He graciously customized it for me and off we went. And I called up a couple hundred of my favorite executives and asked them to be mentors. They all said yes. It was great. And I ended up selling that company to HLTH Foundation and they're running it and growing it. It's really great. I still do mentoring, but I'm no longer running it. And it's just really fun. The NASA organization is called the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, or TRISH. It's a NASA-funded institute run by this unbelievably smart and engaging woman, Dr. Dorit Donaville. And the mission is to figure out solutions to the healthcare needs of astronauts as they go into deep space, and especially to Mars. It's a 3-year trip, basically, without a stop, nowhere to stop along the way if you need something. And very small capsule. And so they need to think about everything from food to making just-in-time pharmaceuticals to how do you do surgery if somebody has a kidney stone, to how do you deal with the loneliness and cognitive impacts of space, the radiation impacts of space. So all of the things that happen to you in space journey are pretty similar to what happened to you as you age, only in super fast motion. Your bones get brittle, you have cognitive impairment, your eyes get pressured, all sorts of things. Anyways, and so we work with scientists, young companies, all sorts of folks to figure out solutions to those problems. And I get to chair the scientific advisory board, which is just crazy fun because you're exposed to amazing science and amazing technology and get to work with the astronauts, and it's a blast.
So,
I love
I mean, that's scenario planning at its deepest. What do the astronauts say? Are they afraid, or how do they approach this when they come to you and say, "Look, what happens if I get, whatever the case may be, something medically," and the concern is, say, "Look, I may pass away because there's no way to treat it." At that point, I'm curious how those conversations go. I mean, that's about as real as it gets.
The people who make it to the astronaut program through the astronaut program, it's really hard to get through the astronaut program to be somebody who's actually an astronaut. The fall off rate is phenomenal. Those people are like fearless. They are smart as hell. They are fearless, and they know 100% know the risks they're taking. Which can be anything from blowing up on, liftoff to being stuck out there and dying to anything else that could happen to you, right? And this is part of the job. I mean, they are amazing people, and they are so interested in making the next trip better for the next guys that are going up to the International Space Station or out to the moon as the next mission. It's fascinating. Yeah.
So with all that you've done, I don't mean to sidetrack you, but because you've met so many people, like, is there anyone in particular that sticks out in your head? You're like, that was the most amazing conversation or meeting. I've never met anyone like that.
That's a great question. Well, I guess, Nicole Stott is an astronaut that really blew my mind in that program in particular. I mean, there's people from all walks of my life that have made me go, whoa. But she's an astronaut. She's been up to the International Space Station, and she's also an artist. And so it's interesting. A lot of the astronauts are actually either musicians or artists.
Really?
Something really creative. And she's dedicated a lot of her free time to creating art, especially to help children with cancer and to help children with creativity. And I got to interview her. I wrote a chapter for a book recently that's coming out soon about the intersection of art and health. And so I focused my chapter on space and the artistic endeavors that have come around the weird Venn diagram of space, health, and art, which, believe me, there's more than you'd think. And I got to talk to her a lot about that extensively. And I was just really blown away by the kind of multi-dimensional thinking,
Huh. All right. So we'll get back to the Berkeley teaching in a second. I want to talk about Jim and how, because to me, I'm in a marriage with an executive, and I understand how it has to be a combined effort, a united front in so many cases. So you alluded to how wonderful he is. I'd love to hear either a story or something about some of the things that he was doing while you were building some of this career up. I'm curious what it was like for him helping to raise Maddie and trying to get his own career also off the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Jim's done some really amazing things. He started his career in politics. He then went to the private sector, and now he's back in government. He's Associate Secretary of Health in California. And he focuses on community relations and sort of big programs that affect large populations and community. He's great because he and I are in some ways polar opposites. He's very calm and mellow. He's, much more easygoing, not so crazy as I. And so we're a good match for each other. And, he is very much believes that all people are equal and should do equal work, and you know, and he loved and loves our daughter and our weird little chihuahua, and is happy to do any and all of it. It's no pride of anything, right? It's just we are a team, we work together. And he travels a little, not as much, more throughout California. I don't know. Like I said, we figure out how to make it work. I mean, I think you have to set your priorities, and our priority was always making sure our daughter was first. And so we can't travel at the same time. And, we have to make sure she's covered, and the rest is, being kind and forgiving to each other, because you can't always be around to do your thing, and
Well,
be that equal partner.
you're a strong personality. And my wife went through this. I'm curious if you did also. When you would travel and be away and then come back and he's doing something in a certain way with your daughter, it's both of your daughter, and you come in and
Yeah.
you're like, wow, that is not the way I would do it. And I'm curious how you would handle that, because I can tell you how my wife did it after, but I'm curious how you did.
It's funny. I had to learn. I mean, I learned really early on, thank God, that I couldn't always be in control if
Yeah.
I was going to leave. I had to allow myself to not be a perfectionist, not try to fix everything because it wasn't broken. And it was challenging, I think, at first. And then I learned to realize it was a relief to give some things up. When I started this was much more about training me than training my husband. It was when I had to, I could train myself to say, I wouldn't do it that way, but it's okay. Boy, I felt much better about life.
Yeah.
Not perfect at it, I gotta say, but it works out.
Yeah. My wife used to come home from being away for a week or whatever it was, and she'd find out the way I was doing something, and we would call it burning up on reentry, alluding to your spacing, where she would come in and be like, what is happening here? Like, listen, we've got this under control. I know it doesn't look that way, but
I
it's
know, right?
working. Let it go. Because my saying was always good enough is good enough. And she got an A
I think
in every
that's such an
school.
important lesson to
Yeah.
learn. I think I was such a perfectionist before I had a child. I'm still, I'd be accused of it to a certain extent, but I let a lot of it go. You have to. You can't do
Listen,
everything.
it's
You just
supposed to
can't.
be messy. That's the
Yeah.
point. Did Maddie pick up some of the traits of yours? Is she a lot like you or no?
She's worse than me,
Oh,
I
goodness.
think, or at least maybe she's like I was when I was younger, type A perfectionist. It's deadly. I tease her all the time about it. But I also, in all seriousness, remind her that, some of that's really unhealthy. And like I learned it later in life. She should try to learn it early. Yeah, it's very interesting to see the little monsters you create, in your own image, whether you'd meant to or not, but the good and the bad, right?
Yeah, listen, I tell my kids that my wife and I are like a buffet. Just take the good stuff and leave the garbage, and you'll be better off. I'm curious about your board seats, and the reason why I ask is I do a fair amount of work with MedTech women. We have a friend in
Yeah.
common, in Amy Belt.
Oh, I'm having lunch with her today.
Are you serious?
I seriously
You
am.
tell her I said hey, and see
I
is
will.
Emery going to be with her or no?
I don't think so.
She's the best. Amy Belt is
Darling, yeah.
beyond extraordinary. I've known her for 20 years and cannot say enough about her.
Oh, Amy's a rock star. Yeah.
So her and Deb and Mika and all the people that are part of that. I don't know if you ever met. Is it Nancy Lynch?
Oh yeah, sure.
Oh yeah.
I
And
know her
so they are just been touting how to get women through the ceiling to be on boards and not be the only board member that's a woman, not be the only one who's not in the chairperson's chair, and all those kinds of things. And so I'm curious about that for you. First of all, what was your first board? How'd you break through? And then the harder question is, what have you done to bring other women with you? Because I imagine there are plenty of them with their hands up saying, can you pull me along?
Yeah. Well, I was, I had the quote unquote easy way to getting my first board. I was a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
So you get on boards, and my first board was a company called Health Hero Network. The very first remote patient monitoring company in 1998. So great idea, a little early for the market. But I got to be in my first board. And, I think we don't get, all people, not just women and not just me. You don't get enough training on what that really means when you're on, a venture person or any other person that goes on boards, like what the real fiduciary responsibility is, what the real governance responsibility is. And it's different in public and private companies to a certain extent. But man, I learned pretty quickly that you have to be a great strategy advisor and a great consigliere, and you can't make yourself an operating person. You can't insert yourself into the company's day-to-day. I have worked really hard to bring other women onto boards. I have, in every case where I have had a say in that, in a nominating committee or in some form, made sure that's who gets interviewed. Now they don't always get picked, but I work really hard to bring my colleagues along, because I think it's important to have diverse management teams, diverse boards, all of it. And I know there's all the research that shows it's a good idea, but it is a good idea. And
No,
it's a good idea.
I don't think anyone can dispute that.
Yeah. Oh, people dispute it all the time. They kind of pay lip service to that. If you take a look around, there's still a lot of boards and management teams that are not diverse at all.
Yeah.
We're still fighting this fight. So yeah, I don't know.
No, I'm with you. What I mean is you can't dispute the data. Like it's
No.
obvious. It's right there in front of your face. You could disagree with it, but you can't say it doesn't exist. So, I mean, that's an interesting part. So when you speak to somebody who is trying to get on a board or is a first-time board member, what's the advice that you give them? Like, okay, it's my first day. What do I wear? What do I do? Where do I sit? Who do I talk to? How do I handle it? Like, I'm curious about that, because once you're in, you're like, okay, well, now what?
Yeah, well, the advice I give them is make sure to talk to each person face to face before you show up for the first meeting.
Okay.
Like, get to know them a little bit, suss out your audience, who are your friends and who are your foes, who are your allies, and who are going to be difficult. Having a board that works well together is as important as having a good management team working together. A board can really mess up a company if it doesn't work well together. And my advice to women in all situations, not just in the board situation, is just be who you are. Like, don't try to pretend you're anybody else, because it doesn't work. And it's too hard to remember who you're pretending to be. So if you just have to be your genuine self, and if people don't like that, well, it's their problem, not your problem. Honestly, that's just kind of the way I live my life.
So you speak up from the first meeting, you're vocal, or do you kind of hang back for the first couple of meetings and get the lay of the land?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, I think you got to not jump in on things you don't know enough about. You got to learn the lay of the land to the extent it's specific and you don't have that knowledge of either the company or the market. But I don't think you should be quiet if it's something you genuinely are qualified to discuss. Why? The point of you being there is to bring your expertise and capability. Yeah.
Okay, well, because that's an interesting part of it. That's what I always ask the folks that I know that have been on boards before, is sometimes the nuts and bolts of how to do it, how to conduct yourself, what to do to prepare, like you just said. I mean, things like that, unless someone tells you, there's no way you're going to know.
Yeah. Well, it's good to take a board class about, how boards work and what your responsibilities are as board members. I think that's really important. There are plenty of board training programs out there. But I think once you've been invited to join and you say yes, you should be presumptively assumed qualified.
No, that's true. They don't want you just taking up a chair. That's
you shouldn't have to prove yourself all over again, to be there. I just think you're supposed to be contributing.
So I read something about Jim that I wanted to ask him, but if he's not going to be able to make it, I'll ask you.
I can get him.
Well, I would love to ask him if he's there, but I don't want to put you out. Is he right there?
Yeah, he's right over there. Hang on a sec.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey, Jim. My name is Matt Kaufman. Thank you so much for sitting down. I've been reading about you, and I have to ask you something.
Sure.
First of all, your family is exceptional, and obviously, without you, none of this happens. She was very quick to just compliment what an amazing human being you are. But I have to know about being a tribal liaison. I've never met anyone who had that title. So I don't know what the American Indian community is like where you work, and I would love to get just 1 or 2 minutes on what it is that you do there, because this is the first time I've ever had a conversation like this.
Thanks. So I serve as Associate Secretary for External Affairs and am the tribal liaison also for the State of California Health and Human Services Agency. And we support 15 different departments and offices under that agency umbrella. And the tribal liaison position came about when former Governor Jerry Brown created by executive order a directive for all agencies to be engaged in tribal consultation with both federally recognized tribes, and we have 109 of those federally recognized tribes in California, as well as urban Indians. And that tribal consultation work has to do with how to engage with federally recognized tribes as sovereign nations. And this has been long overdue. There's been a history in the United States and the state of California of distrust and actually genocide in California in about 1849, where the first California governor, Peter Burnett, his first executive order called for the extermination of all Native Americans in California. So it got off to a really bad start, with the first governor of California being a white supremacist. And so we're making up for long overdue broken promises. So my work as tribal liaison means to help facilitate the government to government engagement with tribes through our departments whose programs are working most closely with the California tribes. And so it's been an opportunity to sort of lay the foundation on how to be able to engage with tribes in a meaningful way, and doing this so it's also sustainable beyond each governor's administration.
Yeah, one day I would love to chat with you more about this. So last question for you is, so being married to someone like Lisa, where she's just a dynamo, she doesn't stop, and she's involved with 37 boards, 14 charities. She's doing every organization in the community. I'm curious what it's like for you just building your own career, which has been substantial, while being a supportive partner and raising your daughter together. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because a lot of couples watch this particular podcast that I do, and they deal with the same kind of things that you do. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are there, because she's a handful.
She's a dynamo. I'm so lucky to have to be married with her for over 34 years now. And together we produced our daughter, Maddie, who's now 27. But the exciting parts have been keeping a sense of humor, trying not to get too serious about any particular issue that comes up. If we get frustrated with each other, give ourselves a timeout and then come back when we've had some deep breaths and can think a little bit more rationally. But really the importance of the communication through thick or thin has been really a guiding, a guidepost, I think, just to keeping our marriage thriving and successful.
Yeah, we have a rule at our house, because my wife she's not as animated as Lisa, but she's similar. We have a 3-day rule. You can't have anything festering for more than 3 days. You have to say it, even if it's about the way you load the dishwasher or whatever it is. You can't, I think the term is called gunny sacking. You can't keep it inside of yourself, because it festers and then it becomes resentment. So whatever it is, you just got to spill it. And sometimes it's absurd. But okay, that's what's bothering you? Okay, I won't put the bread on that shelf anymore. Put the bread on the other shelf. There you go. Well, listen, it was very nice meeting you. She talked so highly about you. I just wanted to say hello, and I'll finish up with her. And
Sure.
And thanks so much for making a minute. Really, an impressive career, Jim. It's. I was reading up on you. You've done a substantial amount for the state of California.
Thanks very much. Glad to meet you.
You too,
Cheers,
sir.
Lisa.
All right. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, you seem like you teach this amazing class at Berkeley, this MBA, entrepreneurship, VC related. So if you can take just a couple minutes, and I know you want to have other things you've got to do. So I'm curious about that, though, because I'm sure people interested in taking this class would love to hear about it.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I actually taught my last class this semester last night. So I've been doing it. I think this is just finished my 14th year, I think. It's a class. It's really about like you said, healthcare, venture capital, and entrepreneurship. But in the class, it's usually 50 students, MBAs. Sometimes some med students come over from UCSF. Sometimes you get an engineering student or an MPH student. What we do is teach. The first couple of classes are about sort of how venture capital works, like basic things like how do funds operate and how do you do valuations and how does due diligence work and all that stuff. And then the rest of the classes, or at least probably 8 or 10 of them, are CEOs coming in from young companies and pitching their deals. And so I bring in a mix of people that I know and don't know. People from biotech, med tech, health, IT, digital health, health services, different stages of companies, different qualities of entrepreneurs. I try to mix it up. So some are super charismatic and some are not so charismatic, maybe. Usually people who are raising money right now or just about to or just did. And they go through their pitch, just like they're in a room with, a VC investment committee, and the students are instructed to behave that way. Well, maybe not quite that way, but the way you would if you were learning, and to ask questions. Anything's on the table, and then we ask the CEOs to leave, and we debrief on the deal. Is it a good deal? Is it a bad deal? Why? What would you have to do in diligence to learn, overcome your objections or to prove yourself right or whatever? What do you think about the valuation? Is it? And then at the end of the semester, we randomly assign them a company, and they have to write an investment memo. Are they going to recommend the investment or recommend against the investment, and why, and all of that. And it's just a blast. It's one of the highest ranked classes at Haas, which makes me very proud. I do it with my friend, Dr. Jeff Rideout. We've been collaborators forever. And I don't know. I love it because I get to find a lot of students' jobs. I hire some of the best ones. I hear from them for years. I run into them in work and business now, 14 years later. Some of them are really accomplished in their careers and they still stay in touch. And I run into them in the airport and all the rest. And it's one of my favorite things to do, actually.
Well, it's interesting because I was just talking to a gentleman who graduated from Ivy up in Canada, and they do all this case study kind of work. Yeah. And yours is a live case study. It's a human being telling you their story, and then your students break it down. I mean, that's an extraordinary innovation from an education standpoint that could be used in several different. It could be used in med school, could be used in the law school for sure. Yeah. Break down a case. I mean, that's something that you could probably build out. I mean, that's a brilliant idea.
I've taught it a little bit at Stanford before. I mean, I think, and I've been invited to it other places. I'm just too lazy to travel around the country for one day a week. But I think, people love it because it's real. It's not a case study. It's a real live experience with a real live company and a real live person. And one of my favorite parts is that for every CEO that comes in, for instance, and I wrote about this recently on my blog, half the class will love them and half the class will hate them. For every deal or company that comes in, half the class will think it's a great investment, half the class will think it's a terrible investment. And it really, kind of speaks to the subjective nature of the field of venture capital in many ways. And also, with the biases you come with and the perspectives and knowledge you come with. And we were talking about it yesterday in class. The last class was yesterday, as I said, and we talked about the papers, and people who knew a particular field really, really well would have a different sensibility about the deal than people who don't, and it's real life, because when you work at a fund, that's what happens every day is you see stuff you don't understand, you see stuff you do understand, you're making educated guesses mostly.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it allows them, the people pitching, to have some practice. It's like a comedian trying out new material. Late night in a bar. I mean,
I'm so grateful that the CEOs almost always say yes.
Yeah.
And that they come and do it. It's not Berkeley's not exactly on the way to anywhere they're probably going. And man, it's great. And they love it. It's like they get feedback, they meet people who they can hire, and it's just been great.
Well, you have been every bit what I thought you were going to be. I love when I'm right. It doesn't happen that often. Well, listen, thanks so much for being on. You really were extraordinary. And next time we do this, let's talk about Maddie a little bit more and talk a little bit more about some of the other things that you've done, because trust me when I tell you, everybody, there's a list past all the things that we talked about. Well, so look, this has been the family business with Lisa Suennen, where we talk about how family and careers are intertwined. Thanks so much for doing this. It really was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. This was super fun, and nobody's ever asked me to bring my husband along before, so that's kind of fun. And Olive is on very few podcasts, so she's appreciative as well, and she'll be expecting her royalty checks, I'm sure.
Her 15 minutes begins now.
But really wonderful to have the opportunity to talk to you.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch for sure. Thanks so much.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.